Tonight's session will be less of an entry and more of what we have gathered over the last few weeks. Together, we've researched the history of the town of Potter's Hill and came up with some unusual but repeated incidents.
Some of which I vaguely recall before I was stationed here. At the Foundation, we receive countless reports from all across the nation, so it's difficult to pinpoint the serious and most dangerous ones.
Right, and we've recently received a report of, well, unfortunately, more missing people. These disappearances are unusually common in this town, according to many of the locals I've talked with. Rumors of witchcraft in the mountains, tales of nightly folklore creatures, and dark rituals performed in the woods are all consistent with their stories.
The veil is tearing. I'm not sure how to stop it until it's too late.
It's terrifying to really think what might come through the veil. After all, the pale man from the teenager's story wasn't caught, even after the ritual was performed and that smoky figure didn't vanish.
Another unseen wraith, yet this one was beginning to take form. Once these wraiths take a full form and become what the Foundation calls a shadow form, they may move around the house freely from where they were conjured. I fear that pale man's successful ritual, that the veil was left open for others to cross through.
Which brings me to a question, sir, if you don't mind, before we begin the majority of the recent report. Why must we do these entries at night? If all these entities prefer the night to present themselves, why are we out there now?
I suppose because spirits will find us rather than our tireless mortal efforts. Sometimes merely talking about spectral entities is enough to draw them forth. Under certain moon phases, we hear them more clearly, as you may have noticed. However, with bodies disappearing, it means that living things are at work here. Stumbling upon them could spell certain danger and possible death.
Speaking of disappearances, I was able to track down some really old information, almost back to the founding years of Potter's Hill. From those old notes, there came some tales regarding a vile creature, I suppose. I'm not sure what class to really place it in. And if it's alright, sir, I'd like to tell those stories now. Perhaps it can shed some light on our investigations, and from these notes it seems like a lot of these people have gone missing too, even in the past.
Very well. After these old stories, we'll update the recordings with the recent disappearances. Maybe there are some connections.
I think there is, yes. These stories, 3 in total, follow one James Mallory, who apparently was some kind of paranormal investigator, even back in the days of early Potter's Hill, way back in the 1600s. These are his journals. Nightmares are a common occurrence, that much is true. At least most of the people I've met claim to have a few night terrors throughout their life, young or old. But what happens when a nightmare morphs into reality? And that is where I, James Mallory, tend to step in. The studying of the mystery of shadows intrigues me, and it seems to me that these people among such a young country have a rising rate of living terrors. It seems absurd, but there have been 5 disappearances since I have arrived here in Potter's Hill. The cemetery is a new project to continually maintain if they wish to remember those who are deceased. What lingers here in the shadows is my first and primary focus as I live rather uncomfortably in a place of strangers. These few recordings done with ink, quill, and paper will be my sessions with these terrified civilians, in hope that I shall discover the truth of this ever-darkening shadow. The first session I sat down with one Abigail Williams, claiming she has witnessed a night demon on multiple occasions. I've written the story from an outside perspective, and perhaps with a bit of embellishment to make the mood enlightening. Session 1, year 1612, 14th of August. Victim, Abigail Williams. It began on a Tuesday, a cold and windy day with gray clouds spitting upon the sullen dirt. The forest was whispering around the quaint town of Potter's Hill, littering dying and crumpled leaves upon the cobblestone roads. A storm was upon them, no doubt, and the civilians rushed to put away their livestock and push their children indoors. Gray clouds for 3 days was an ill omen, or so the pastor would claim, and if they did not receive the sun soon, there were rumors of possible scouting to a new boundary. The light needed to be upon them, or else food would become scarce. The people of the church had begun to worry that the precious land was under a continual and evil curse. Abigail had no quarrel with the pastor, nor to his followers who had thought of this living curse lingered around their village. But even so, they would often murmur amongst each other in fear of this unknown terror. Abigail would listen intently to these conversations as the spread of the ill omen was across the town in a matter of a day's passing. As the wind picked up rather ferociously one day, howling and beating against the wooden frames of the houses, causing the windowsills to slap against the walls, Abigail squinted into the frenzied branches of the forest. If she guessed correctly, this night would be the second that it would come. A creature, unlike any human, yet sounded exactly like one. But as she gazed upon the tall stalks of the decaying cornfields leading into the thick forest of pine trees, their bark nearly ripping off, she could not stay any longer. She feared the two piercing eyes would meet hers, and that she would be caught under an evil spell. Yet as she turned her back, the sensation of those glaring eyes pounded into her mind and caused her to double over. Dizziness was set upon her, and she stumbled her way inside her home, not bothering to latch the door. Tripping into bed, Abigail passed out of consciousness for the better part of the storm. Rain poured down onto Potter's Hill, flooding the streets and destroying what was left of the scattered crops. But when an hour had passed, the deluge stopped instantly, and Abigail had woken up. She desired to get up, but she was suddenly bound to the bed, her wrists and ankles pinned down by an invisible force. Glancing around, she could not find any hands forcing her down, only herself struggling with this unforeseen enemy. Abigail forced her neck so that she could shift her focus to the bedroom door in front of her, and flinched in terror when it slammed shut on its own. Or so she thought. At first she guessed it to be a strong draft from the storm outside, but when she listened, nature had turned quiet. Almost too quiet. Again, Abigail flinched when she suddenly saw movement in front of her, for when the door had closed, a pale hand with black talons scraped against it, scratching the wood with a terrible rub, and heard scuttling near the foot of the bed directly after. The breathing of this peculiar creature began as a whisper, choked and forced. It rose to a gurgled attempt of possible words, and as Abigail's own breathing quickened, whatever was at the foot of the bed matched it. The steady rhythm of her panicked attempts of a yell were muffled, and her head shot upward. The only thing she could move was her eyes, tracing her focus from the door to the bed to the table on her side. On it was a single candle that had been the only source of light. What she saw in the room with her now was two silver glaring eyes, surrounded by a pale face, and a darkness, blacker than the night sky clouded the rest of its body. With crooked teeth it smiled, and it breathed in steady, gargled chokes. Abigail shut her eyes tightly and tried to clench her fists, but they remained open and vulnerable, the same to the rest of her body. With a cold and clammy touch, she felt the creature run its hands and sharpened talons upon her leg, and then up to her arm, up to where she could sense it being inches away from her face. A slimy substance ran across her cheek from the creature, its tongue marking its next victim. Abigail still did not wish to see her oppressor, and as it jumped off her in an instant, the sensation of being pushed into the bed lessened, her breathing stopped, and all was calm again. Conclusion of Session 1. From what I've gathered in my books of lore, history, and strange mythology and folklore of the world, I have pinpointed this creature down to two suspects, both of which I know not how to lure to myself. The first being what's known as a skin changer, a shapeshifter that walks among the earth pretending to be blood of another being, only to capture and slay the poor prey. The other guess may be far-fetched, but there is one such nightmarish creature named the Alptron, or in rough translation, a nightmare. I must do some more researching before my next session so I know what I'm up against. But what I can gather from this session is that this creature enjoys the fear and suffering of average and ordinary citizens. It doesn't necessarily pick the individuals who are in power, but rather the people who are, unfortunately, easily forgotten. It may be a sad truth to reveal, but if it's another step and note into my investigation, I must remember every small detail at all costs. The next session of this mystery will be at random, and I hope that the next death will not be because of this strange and dangerous creature. Session 2, Year 1612, 17th of September. Victim, Jacob Hoffman. From the sudden death of Abigail, there was great unrest in Potter's Hill. The hunting grounds for the men were retracted significantly. The women would rarely go near the wooden fence borders, patiently waiting for their husbands, brothers, and sons to return, and the children would only play outside when the sun shone, and there were only wisps of clouds floating daintily above. The fear of shade itself grew intensely. Jacob Hoffman did not believe in an old wives' tale, though, and the rumors of a so-called nightmarish beast prowling the town was completely absurd to him. He was a man of knowledge and faith, and with both being at his side, he would recognize no such defeat on himself. He pushed the council to extend the hunting borders again, or else Potter's Hill would go into starvation into the next year. As another work-filled day came to a close, Jacob hunkered near to his favorite spot in the family house, a comfortable, warm fireplace where he could hear his sister's low voice tell her children tall tales of old, where those imaginary creatures of the town's rumors came alive in their minds. Jacob took a quick swig of hard liquor from his canteen to wash away the long and strenuous day, and sighed deeply as his sister finished her story to the delight of the children. He scoffed at the fantasy of actually placing belief in such a thing before his sister had waved the kids into the room for a deep slumber. Jacob turned in for the night, his limbs and back sore from a long day of tracking, hunting, and hauling. He placed his heavy boots in the corner of his room, shed his long-sleeved shirt off, and stretched as he paced in a weary and exhausted mood. As he glanced out the window, he could see that his neighbor had forgotten to draw their curtains, leaving their bed and their head peeking out of the blankets, exposed to the full moon's blue light. He shook his head, but just as he was about to turn away, he saw movement to the further side of the bed. The blankets ruffled and shifted on their own, as if tiny mice were underneath. But it was not rodents at all, which made the blankets suddenly rise, nearly to the size of a child, and had rounded top to it. The neighbor did not move a single time during this whole moment, confusing Jacob to the point where he called out loudly to his sister, who barged in and scolded him for awakening the kids. But when she saw his terrified expression, she rushed to the window. From above, the sight was truly horrifying. A pale, deformed creature crouched on the stomach of the neighbor, its bare feet resembling the skeletal surface digging into the once healthy skin of the poor victim. With black talons, it drove its fingers straight into the flesh of the neighbor's neck, where they screamed in what seemed like absolute silence, leaving their mouth gaping open in complete terror. Jacob winced and clutched the edges of his holy book, reciting brief prayers under his breath, protection, and blessings. Both he and his sister saw from its face that it was no ordinary figure, but rather a demon set from evil itself. Its eyes were a dull silver, sunken into black sockets, while its gray face was blanketed mostly by thin, entangling strands of black, wet hair. Its nose was nearly non-existent, and from its mouth protruded thin, jagged teeth, first smiling greedily at its victim, and then to open it at an unnatural and wide angle. From the neighbor's body wafted a blue mist, swaying in the air like a current in the river, but morphing into a black cloud as it flowed into the creature's mouth. Jacob and his sister stared at the awestruck horror for another minute until suddenly the creature stopped, snapped its jaw shut, and gazed straight up to the pair with its menacing, unblinking eyes. Jacob gasped, closing the curtain swiftly and uttering another short prayer. His sister looked at him with a despairing gloom. It was too late for them. Indeed, from that very night, Jacob was suddenly struck with an illness in which no doctor had seen or experienced before. Bedridden, he feared the day that the night terror would come for him. He wouldn't need much time to see his sister again, for she too fell sick in a matter of days after him. With fear plaguing their minds at day and tormenting them at night, they would finally feel a release at the end of the 7th day. Their funeral was on the 8th. Conclusion of Session 2. My research has brought me to the conclusion that this is indeed the creature of the Albtraum, and after this session, it became clear to me that not only is this Albtraum alive and present, but it appears to place curses on eavesdroppers. I do wonder on most recent nights if this thing has physically been transported to the new land, or if this figment of folklore appears from the minds of those who believe it. Both sides are terrifying to accept as the truth. Despite it being in the presence of many of its victims, it is not much of a public figure, so to speak. I have learned that this creature does not induce horror toward its victims as a result of stealing their essence, but it worries me that placing curses and hexes upon people is little to no stress to it. Perhaps the light of the full moon had given it an ultimate power of sorts, its peaking phase of sinister skills. I haven't much time before the entirety of Potter's Hill is vacant, emptied of their very souls. This next entry is a little different from the others, as it includes some dialogue. Most of our entries don't really rely on dialogue, as most words sometimes can't be remembered exactly how they were spoken at the given time, but the conclusion on this is, well, disturbing.
Even so, we must finish this entry. We have a long night ahead of us. Dark presences may already be here, listening to this very story.
I'll do my best, sir. Session 3, year 1613, 29th of January. Victim, Timothy Ralston. The dreams of a child are endless, where the imagination is higher than the sky. So much creativity in one mind, even in a dull place such as Potter's Hill, where the graveyard has a bigger population than the town itself. If not for the decaying crops, the bitter cold of winter wiped out most of the town. It was a promising idea, the dream of Potter's Hill, but apparently they were not prepared for what lies beyond reality. The comprehension of other realms was not in the mind of Timothy during his last night in Potter's Hill, and it was quite depressing to know that his brilliant mind would not reach to the clouds one day. There he was, huddled around his diminishing family of 4, once 7. The dying embers of a fire was the only source of warmth in this night. Timothy's father blew at it to keep it alive, while his mother swallowed both Timothy and his sister in thick blankets. Their teeth chattered and they sniffed their noses in discomfort. Red rashes appeared in every spot they itched, day after day, and their stomachs groaned in pain. "Tell us a story," said Timothy to his mother, "to help us pass the time." "No stories today," his mother responded, rubbing her hands together. "We must spare our breath while we still can." "But couldn't we have fun before the winter breaks us?" asked Timothy's sister. "It will not break us," retorted the father. "We will survive another season, just as we have done before. You must get some sleep before the fire goes." "Perhaps I can dream us out of here," mumbled Timothy. "What about the Dream Man?" Timothy's sister asked. "That's a good story, too." Timothy's mother smiled as she wrapped them both in a thin blanket and agreed to tell it quickly before the moon was to be at its highest. The story began with 2 kids, just like Timothy and his sister, who had almost nothing to play with or other children to be friends with. It was a lonely town in the forest, and there was no way of getting out. But one day, a tall man with a flowing black coat, fancy pants, and a tall black hat came striding into town on a large and exquisite horse. Inside the backpack, the man told the children he had magical items, and they were indeed beautiful and thrilling to behold. The man gave them trinkets and toys to play with on the first day, and their delight lifted to the skies. But soon the toys vanished that night. On the second day, the man gave them smaller toys, but made of wood and did not move or sparkle. The kids were disappointed, but the man promised them if they joined him in the enchanted forest, he would give them delight every day, full of magical toys and snacks on the hour. On the third day, no one in the town ever saw those 2 children again, nor did they see the dreaded Dream Man. "So what can we learn from this?" Timothy's mother asked quietly. "Not to trust strangers," rang in Timothy and his sister, their eyes closing gently. No other words were shared as the children were rushed into the rooms, and the door was shut as the blankets of the bed wrapped neatly around them. Timothy was thinking of all the toys he would get if the Dream Man came. There were so many that came to mind that he tossed and turned in bed. He couldn't decide on just one of them. Gusts of violent winds shifted the banks of snow that could be heard outside, and the groaning of stiff branches of the forest that grew closer into the town each passing year. Timothy shivered as more of the howling passed by their house, invading their privacy and giving tremors to their hopes. A story would be told that night, and of a way out, but not in the manner that little Timmy had wished. As he dozed off in an uneasy sleep, he dreamt of his house, much grander than now, with a roaring fire, presents marked for him and his sister around a decorated and full tree, and a full plate of food for each of his brothers and sisters. All 7 were there, when they had all been a full family, and he was the happiest that he could ever be. He danced and sang and played with the little trinkets his father had carved for them. It was as if Christmas had come twice that winter. Once he was finally worn out, he crawled into bed, but not before he would make a new friend, the man in the closet. He was a funny man with a silly voice. He could not really talk, only growl and cough. But what he did have that was so funny to Timothy was his skinny head and long nose. His smile stretched from ear to ear, and he had many sets of teeth. His hair was wet, and it covered its glowing silver eyes. Timothy stood up from his bed and asked it to play, of which it answered clear as day.
Come here. We play in here.
The man stretched out a thin, pale arm with the outstretched taloned hand. Timothy giggled and inched his way forward. He neared the blackening closet, growing bigger and bigger, until the last thing he saw was the countless freckled teeth, smiling and opening. The next morning, Timothy was gone, and no traces were seen of him. Strange tracks from outside led to the window, and another tombstone was added to the cemetery. Funerals were a common event, no matter what the age, and the shadow of fear had taken over. Conclusion of Session 3. The story seems interesting, as it comes from a child, and a wild story at that. The elf drum gives nightmares, yes, but it also gives an unmistakable lure of curiosity. The discovery of new things, whether it be nightmares or friends, is what makes people so vulnerable and gullible. I suppose that's also why the elf drum is so dedicated on the lesser people of society, because they have dreams that seem so unattainable. Why then should they bother even dreaming of impossible things? I will never understand or live through. But with this last session, it seems like the elf drum will continue to strike at random, leaving hardly any trace, and if it is followed, it only leads to more disappearances and deaths. So you might be asking this: how do I know the emotions? How do I know the details? It's not that I'm writing this as an embellished tale, like I said earlier, because I was there for it all. I am writing this to relive these savory moments that make themselves home in my mind. Yes, I am shifty and unliked among the society, but I am still here until the town will perish. Whether by decay or torment of the nightmares, I shall continue to return. I am the darkness that lurks in the corner. I am the one who was born in the night. I am the devourer of hope, and I am the death bringer. I am the mystery of the shadows.
After hearing this, as well as the final conclusion, it leaves me with an unsettling result. That this creature, which is extremely intelligent and very clever, was never found dead. Nothing was written about it, and though it has been hundreds of years, some creatures of folklore tend to live very long and violent lives.
You're saying it might still be out there then? And, well, I don't think I really need to ask this, but did you hear that? All these ethereal whispers are...
Leave. Do not come back. We are watching.